Hey folks, Steve here with a special on-camera video today. This is going to be an interesting video because it's really just an intro or explanation of a game series that I've recently have gotten into a little bit. I haven't been able to explore it a whole lot yet, and I hope to do some more videos on the games in the series in the future. We'll see how that goes. And the game series I'm talking about, if you can tell by looking at the games on my table here, is the Great Battles of History series. And I want to just quickly kind of go over what the game series is, what it covers, what are in very brief, what the mechanics are, and just sort of set the tone for what's to come. So typically, on my channel at least, I've always done strategic level games because I really enjoy strategic level games. I will occasionally play something that is a little more operational in nature. But the Great Battles of History series is a series about battles, very specific battles. So each title in that series will typically come with, we'll say 4 to 9 or even more, depending on what deluxe edition of the game you're getting. Some series of battles from a particular historic time period. And the game series has been around for a long time. I think the first time the very first game came out may have been in the 90s, I want to say. And GMT has, over the years, reprinted these with more deluxe editions, and they're still looking to do more reprints, though some of these products have gotten harder and harder to find because not all of them have been reprinted. Most of them are currently out of print, other than the more recent printings of SPQR that has just come out as of this video. And hopefully we'll see more to come. There's Cataphract that's coming out sometime within the next year or two. I have that on pre-order, so I hope to get that. There's just a lot of fun things down the road to hope for, I guess. And so far, as of this video's writing, there are 15 entries in the series, and the games run from Ancient Warfare. The earliest chronologically is Chariots of Fire, which I have a copy of right here. It's a relatively newer game, was published in 2010. It covers Bronze Age conflicts, and then there is, depending on your level of pedantry, Hoplite or Hoplite. I like to say Hoplite, but you'll get some grief from people about how you want to say that. That is the most recent game in the series. It's volume 15, and those are like the most ancient ones. And then there are some games that span through sort of this ancient to medieval time period, and there are a few titles that just begin to touch upon gunpowder. But the game series kind of stopped venturing out there. So there's, I think, a game that sort of starts to cover some musket and pike, I think. I can't remember the title off the top of my head right now doing this video. I probably should have looked that up before I did it. Oh well. That one's kind of hard to find and out of print, but for the most part, what you're getting when you play a Great Battles of History game is basically ancient to medieval warfare. All the games that I have here on my table are all sort of oriented around European history. There are a few titles that cover Japan. I believe they are Samurai and Ran, R-A-N. I don't have those titles. They're out of print. It may be hard for me to get those titles, but for now, I'm sort of enjoying the fact that I have what I have here in terms of European history. The very first game in the series was the Great Battles of Alexander, which I'm going to move the camera a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. Great Battles of Alexander, the Macedonian Art of War. That's actually the latest printing version of the game, so that came out in 2014, 2015, and includes a ton of extra battles from various expansion modules and things as a deluxe game. And then the second volume in the series was SPQR, which again has just been reprinted with a lot of, again, expansion and C3I article type stuff included as a deluxe package, which is really cool. I really like when they are able to do that. And sort of the other thing with this is that every game that's come out has had some level of either expansion modules, which typically come in a Ziploc bag with some extra maps, some extra counters, and an extra rule book to detail those new battles. Those have come out, every once in a while for the various games, and it's kind of hard to track those down. And then in the C3I magazine, which is a great magazine if you're not familiar with it, which typically gets published with game material related to GMT games, there are extra battles there and extra counters, and I'm really glad that I've been acquiring those magazines over the years, because I've been able to get to use some of the counters that have been on those counter sheets waiting in the wings. So a lot of interesting stuff to enjoy. What's really neat is that the gameplay of the series is pretty logically consistent, in that, if you learn the rules to one, you can take a lot of that with you to the next game in the series. But each game will typically incorporate some nuance or rules that are really respective of the time period. So, for instance, Hoplite has mechanics that are really all around the sort of hoplite phalanx formation and movement, and that's very different than how even the phalanxes are in the Alexander game, which obviously includes phalanx formations of units. SPQR has special rules around how the Roman legions were organized and how their combat tactics were very different from the typical just line and cavalry that the Macedonians practiced. And so what you can kind of do as you play through the chronological games, if you go from, say, Chariots of Fire on through, is you start to sort of see that evolution of, at one time, chariots were really important, but they, eventually, as we looked at into the, we moved, west geographically, and we looked at Greco-Persian War, we see the clash between heavy infantry phalanx against the light infantry and archery and cavalry of Persia, and then so into Alexander's, really Philip II's revolutions in warfare and the combined arms of phalanx and heavy cavalry, and then into how the Romans had their way of conducting warfare and using smaller logical sets of formations and the benefits to that, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of detail here, and if you're really into the evolution of weapon systems and seeing how those interact with one another, I think the series is a great treat for that. It's neat because you get all these different units, but you also get, with the scenario, a lot of background information on the scenarios. Those scenarios, those battles, will tend to include some additional rules that may reflect some special circumstance that occurred during that time period. To kind of show an example of kind of what some of the stuff you're going to find if you're going to be playing the game, I just took out some components for us to look at here. Over here is a map. I didn't put any plexi down, so there's a little bit of popping here. But this is a map taken from Hoplite and shows the maps for Mycale and Mantinea, if I'm saying those correct. And you can kind of see, and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here, you can start to see what you're dealing with, especially with a lot of these ancient battles, are kind of plain maps where a lot of flat ground for fighting, but there may be different terrain features like rivers and forests and elevation changes. Those elevation changes will have an impact on things like missile fire. Archers may be disruptive for formed formations moving through elevation changes, because that was obviously disruptive to the formation and those types of things. And basically each battle is going to usually have its own map. Like this Mycale one has a sort of a town on the map. And I suspect, the right amount of research has been done here to reflect the terrain of the time. And you'll probably run across some situations where, a battle may reuse another battle's map, because that map is a very, it almost looks like a blank map of just flat terrain, and that's what it was, because many of these ancient battles were just conducted on very wide, flat, open terrain. You can reuse some of the maps for different battles because of that. So, what you're really getting isn't necessarily, intense battles of, moving through the forests and hills like an operational game in like World War II or Vietnam or something like that. These battles and where the fun of tactical matter comes into play is the control of the formations and using the right units against the right matchup to beat your opponent in positioning, and the command and control aspects of the leaders. Leaders play a pretty big role in the system itself, and that's where you can get kind of into really good leaders against really poor leaders, but maybe offset by one side having a lot better quality units. So there's that aspect. To kind of show what it might look like on the map and kind of what things start to look like, I'm going to put some counters from the Great Battles of Alexander game on here for the Hoplite map. Doesn't really matter. Just want to show kind of what some of this may look like if you're looking to play the game. Get down here and zoomed in. So you can see we have some Macedonian units, red for Macedonia, here from the Alexander game, and what we see is that elongated counter here is a Macedonian phalanx unit, so double-size counter. And if you're unfamiliar with seeing these double-size counters, it's kind of wild if you're just used to these half-inch counters for all your other war games. Seeing these double-wide ones is kind of fun. And there are various ratings on the counters, so they'll say, that yellow boxed number is a size rating, which is sort of a calculation of how many men are in that formation. You also have the all-important number right to its right in that sort of brown or black outline, which is the troop quality number. And really the troop quality number governs so many important things in the game. And just to summarize that very quickly, the higher the troop quality number, overall the better the unit is, the longer it can sustain combat before fleeing, and things like that. So, obviously higher is better, and you'll run into some situations where, maybe a lower troop quality unit just from luck of die rolling may be able to beat one that's superior, but, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And, you can see there's some designations there for PH, so it's a phalanx unit. What the game does is when you have shock combat, or what, if you're unfamiliar with the term, it's basically just melee combat, hand-to-hand fighting. You're going to compare the troop type against the other opponent's troop type, and that's going to put some die roll modifiers to the die that you're rolling for combat. So like a phalanx is a heavy infantry type of attacker, and it's going to do pretty well in melee combat against units that are usually lighter, depending on the weapon system that unit's using. You'll also have lighter units here, so we have, you can see here, if I can get it to focus at some point, a little bit there. You can see there's some skirmishers, so that SK is signifying them as skirmishers. So, lower troop quality, lower size number, size of 1, quality of 4. Their movement is 6, that's the number in the lower right, so they can they'll tend to move more quickly than big heavy guys in formation, that's obvious. The little letter designations, the A or the S in a circle there towards the sort of top half of the counter above that SK, signifies that they're a missile unit and what type of missile. So in the game you're going to have units that are capable of firing ranged weaponry, and they might be firing bow and arrow, they may be firing slings, and then depending on the game you're playing, they might have things like crossbows or composite bows, different variations, javelins is an option. And so you'll get a different mix of these different unit types, and you'll be using them in tandem and trying to figure out what's the best way to use them. And of course the game has a lot of varied mechanics like withdrawal before combat, where if a heavy unit is starting to attack some of these light skirmisher guys, these light skirmisher guys actually have an opportunity to run away from those slower units if they see them coming. And so the game system actually does a really good job of sort of portraying this, what is really a dynamic state, right, of a battle. Was not stop and go, stop and go. It was a lot of flurry of activity, but there's enough reaction movement and reaction actions that you can take in the game that even if it's a sort of a turn-by-turn, formation-by-formation setup, you still have a lot of ability to react and do different things against your opponent. A big part of it is having the leaders trump the other leaders, so when it may be some leader's turn to activate units for movement and combat, there's a possibility of seizing the initiative and having a better leader or a decent leader instead get to act. And it's just kind of hard to explain, I guess, but a form of momentum where, obviously if you're a leader on the battlefield, you can't see everything, you can't control everything, and it's possible that a very astute commander may be marshaling his forces in such a manner that it's very hard for you to react properly and to get your men to react properly. And that's what those mechanics are sort of simulating. Now, across the different games in the series, you'll find that most of these unit designations and values are going to be pretty similar to one another. So just as a point of comparison, I've gotten some units out from a couple different games just to show. So if I look, here's a Scythian heavy cavalry and a Turkoman light cavalry from Devil's Horseman. Now, let's see if I can get it to focus. There we go. So the right unit is from a game called Devil's Horseman, which is a game covering the Mongols. So we're thinking 1200 AD time frame. But the Scythian heavy cavalry is from Great Battles of Alexander, so 300 odd BC. But they're very similar, and you can see the right unit doesn't have a size rating, and that's because Devil's Horseman doesn't use size ratings. But they both have a troop quality number, they both have a movement factor, and there's a couple of things in that Turkoman unit, like its ranged value in a triangle, so that's a little bit different. It's going to be treated a little bit differently than the Scythian heavy cavalry cataphract unit. So very similar, and you can kind of just see all the way that troop quality is used in one game is going to be very similar to how it's used in another game. So again, you can kind of, if you get good at one, you can begin to get very good at another and get a lot of good I guess, you're making use of a lot of the same rules other than making sure you're taking into account the specific stuff, whatever that ends up being. A couple other things I wanted to talk about quick in this video is that while each Great Battles of History game is a self-contained product and you can play it and you can enjoy it, there is something called Simple Great Battles of History. And what that product is an attempt to take what some might look at as being a very complex system or complicated system with a lot of die rolls, and attempt to sort of shrink the game system down to something that plays a little faster, maybe something closer to like Commands and Colors. And so what you can do, and this is still available on the GMT website, is you can order the Simple Great Battles of History rulebook, and you'll get it like this. And what is in it is a playbook that provides the rules to play battles from various entries in the series in the Simple Great Battles of History format. You'll get a player aid chart that has its own charts when playing Simple Great Battles of History, and then the rule book for Simple Great Battles of History. And the way that this all works is that if you get the Simple Great Battles of History rulebook, you learn that, and then it's really like 20-ish pages of rules. It is a little bit different than your standard Great Battles of History rule set, but it is more, it's faster to play, it's a little more straightforward, and then sometimes these later printing versions of Great Battles of History will also include additional guidance, so that if you're choosing to play this game as a Simple Great Battles of History game instead of the regular, what are the sort of modifications to this rule set here to play it. And really, and if you can't just get, say, SPQR and just out of the box be able to play the Simple Great Battles of History version. You do need to get the Simple Great Battles of History rulebook from GMT to play it in that way. I have played some battles from the Great Battles of Alexander with the simple rules. I do like it. It is faster to play. It's easier to teach a newbie, so you can get playing more quickly. The rules still make sense from a tactical perspective of what's being portrayed, and it's a lot of. I found it to be a lot of fun. probably cuts the scenario time in half. However, what you're giving up is some more of that historical fidelity that's in each game. So, whether or not you want to do simple versus regular, I think is going to come down to how much time you have to play in that given day, or who you're playing with, and how you want to approach that. But I do recommend it, if you're getting into this series or want to, while the Simple Great Battles of History rulebook is still in print and available, pick it up. I think it's about $20 from GMT, so now's a great time to get it before it goes out of print, and go from there. There is a companion product for Simple Great Battles of History that is out of print, and that is the Simple Great Battles of History C3I Battle Manual. This is a book of scenario information and counters and charts to support playing Simple Great Battles of History and past C3I modules that had come out for the various Great Battles of History. So the counter sheet that comes with that is nice because it's got counters for units and leaders from those C3I articles that may be hard to find now because those C3I issues are so old. But even this is out of print, so if you're able to get this, great. I managed to snag a copy, but if you're not playing Simple Great Battles of History, maybe not a huge value. But if you are going to play with it and you can find a copy, this might be pretty cool. You can leverage some of the additional scenarios and play them in the simple version. If you're wanting to play some of these battles in the regular Great Battles of History version, a lot of those articles for those extra battles in Great Battles of History are actually available on the C3I website, and that's c3iopcenter.com. I'll put the link in the description below. If you go there, there's a archive section, and you can look at the back issues and counters and articles section of the archives, and you can find a great number of articles talking about this series, as well as extra scenarios that you ought to be able to play with the counters in the games that you own. So there's a lot of additional SPQR battles that I'm fairly certain most of them you can play with the counters that are in the main game. And there are some cases where it'll tell you if you don't have the counters from the magazine, you can use some replacement counters. So something worth looking at. There's a lot more even with the whole game series than just what you get in your box. It's worth looking around for other stuff. And then finally, I just thought I should mention, this series, Great Battles of History, is primarily the brainchild of Mark Herman and Richard Berg, and for better or for worse, they're great designers, and they've managed to put together a really great system. This system has a sort of a cousin in the form of the Men of Iron series, which is just a Richard Berg design system. I have one of the games in that series, and it's Arquebus. This is one of the newer ones. And Men of Iron tends to cover conflicts that are truly just more medieval in nature, so similar to Devil's Horsemen, in that they're going to cover medieval battles, the War of the Roses, the Crusades, and then obviously, here with Arquebus, with the Battles for Northern Italy, there is some very, very early gunpowder stuff. And so there's going to be a tri-pack being published by GMT that collects the first 3 volumes in the series of Men of Iron, Arquebus being the 4th one. The systems are very similar. There are some differences, but it does a lot of the same type of mechanics in a very similar way. So I definitely see them as a companion game series, though a little bit different in the rules, and obviously different subject matter a little bit later in your historical time frame. And, of course, from Arquebus on, you're going to be looking at games in the tactical format, the battle format, things like the Musket and Pike series, which is going to cover your 30 Years' War, English Civil War, and then there are various other games, beyond that as you get into the Enlightenment era and Napoleonics. But those are all different game series by different designers. Obviously the scope widens a whole lot with a bunch of different possible games out there to play. Like the Battles of the American Revolution or the Great Battles of the American Civil War. I haven't been getting too much into in the past, haven't got much into the battle level games, the tactical level games, but I do think the Great Battles of History is pulling me in to that, and I'm going to hope to do some coverage of this series on the channel, along with my continued World in Flames stuff. and any other weird game reviews or unboxings or whatever is going on. So, Great Battles of History, pretty interesting stuff. Check it out. Right now you can get SPQR from GMT. Everything else is in some variant level of being out of print, but the secondary market, hopefully you can grab something. So, anyways, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you like this video, hit like. If you'd like to see more videos like this, hit subscribe. I do unboxing videos, reviews, and instructional videos for various war games. Until next time, take care. See ya.